Hey, everybody. Welcome to our next session of the Flight Lab series, Copilot in Action. I'm joined by our Chief AI Architect, Scott Papier, today, who's going to lead you through a session on, we're actually doing an app spotlight today, so Copilot in Excel. I'm really excited for this one. I think there's going to be a lot of really good insights and like just some practical nuggets you can take out of this one. So looking forward to it, Scott. Before I pass it over to you, just some housekeeping items for anyone who's joining us for the first time today. This will be recorded and you'll have access to this on demand. You'll get an email when that's ready. It'll be through the same event link. And by the way, make sure on this page at the top there's sessions and you can see the one from last month, and those will all be located there as we go through the series. If you want to catch up on a session, those will be located there. Let us know how we did at the end of this event in the event survey, or you can take it anytime throughout this session. It's at the bottom of your toolbar there. Love to hear your feedback and really appreciate it. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you, Scott.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Bree. So, hello, everyone, and welcome. Really looking forward to obviously going through the Flight Lab today, more focused on Copilot in Excel. So, it's really going to be a lot of fun, to be quite candid, because we're going to be inside of Excel for most of the day as we go through some of the different types of prompts that we can use. And yeah, I'm just really excited to kind of share with you how I use it, how it can up level you, obviously. Remember, in terms of scaffolding, what we've talked about inside of Copilot, we need to really make sure, obviously, that we're using it where Copilot is really useful, right? And what I mean by that is, once again, when we start dealing with Excel, a lot of people really don't understand that large language models are not the best at data analysis. So the question really comes down to, like, how can we actually do better than with Excel to make this faster for an end user when we start looking at where the strengths are inside of Excel. So today we're going to leave that demystified for you. It's going to be live. We're going to be using live examples as we're going through this. So we're not just going and creating a YouTube video and making sure it's pristine, obviously. So as we go through this, expect there to be some issues, and let's talk about how do we get past those issues to go faster and also to increase our accuracy. Because obviously when we're inside of Excel, that's going to be really paramount because we don't want to have formulas that look bad or do bad calculations, and we want to make sure that we're getting the consistent results that are going to be needed, as you can imagine. So with that, pitter patter, let's go ahead and get at her. I'm going to go ahead and just share my agenda that I have for today. So obviously, I want to give a quick introduction on who I am. If you haven't been in the Flight Lab before, just so you've got some background as well. As you have questions as well, just know, feel free to pop it in the attendee chat here. I'm monitoring it on my right screen, so if you see me looking at every now and then, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have as we go through this, or even some feedback items that you have, because I know AI is obviously being pushed so heavily for all of us that sometimes it just gets a little bit convoluted in terms of what the capabilities are. We really want to be those trusted advisors for you so that you know exactly what it can do. So I'd be more than happy to answer your questions live as we go through this as well. We're going to jump into Excel for primarily most of this session. We're going to talk about, obviously, the data insights, the formula generation, the data visualization, macro generation, data cleansing. Like, there's a lot of different cool features that we can do and create that are going to allow us to scale this even further. So obviously I want to cover that with you. And what I also want to cover is, how do we use Excel in conjunction with other tools in M365 to go faster? Because once again, the theme here that I keep on telling everyone when we look at AI enablement isn't that we're going for 100% efficiency gains or even 80% efficiency gains. What we're really trying to do is 5 to 20 to start here, right? As we start understanding patterns, usage, abilities, capabilities, platform enablement. There's all these things that have happened in the last 2 years that have really built this architecture that we use. And then so understanding how we can use it to identify or tackle other things that I do. An example would be an RFP. I'd love to have Copilot answer questions in Excel that basically state what Business Central can do as an example for a feature requirement. And I'm sure in your business, you may have RFP given scenarios as well. How can you use Copilot to go faster, to be able to tackle some of those scenarios? And these are some of the basic concepts that I showed even about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, as we started exploring what Copilot can do. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and then obviously have a conclusion so you kind of know what you can tell your leadership team and anyone else that's interacting obviously with Copilot for Excel to really have the reality around this, right? So I want to do a quick introduction here. Scott Verpeer. So my title is Chief AI Architect, big name. Really what it means is that I get to have the luxury, and I will call it a luxury, to basically understand all the different AI enablement capabilities on the Microsoft platform, whether it's Dynamics, whether it's Office, whether it's Azure, whether it's Git, whether it's whatever the product is. I really need to understand what those workloads are and how we use those to really re-envision how we interact then with business systems. So obviously, I've got a lot of passions. One of the big ones here is anything engineering. I'm a big family person. I love to be able to teach my kids how to use these capabilities as well. Interestingly, my daughter uses Copilot daily. In fact, she uses Copilot more than she watches YouTube, which is really kind of atypical, I think. But at the same point, it really shows how these systems help creative minds grow and understand, obviously, what the future is going to be. If you think about it, I grew up on computers when I was about 16, 17, right, to start doing some of the networking as an example. My daughter at the age of 11 is using tablets and computers and all that other type of stuff to really go through and even push that envelope further so that when she gets out in the world, she knows that AI enablement is a critical thing that she's interacted with. So if you haven't done that with your kids yet, and you do have kids, please do. It's absolutely worth it. Now, today, what we're going to do is we're going to jump in right away into Excel and kind of go through that. And Tracy, yeah, she's definitely tenacious, right? Today, what we're going to do is we're going to go through Excel and we're going to cover some of the basic features. And we're really going to start from ground zero all the way up to just different examples that I have that I've used as well as we've gone through this. And the fun thing about this team is that we're going to be able to do this by actually generating demo data as an example that you can use to go through some of these different concepts that you can then teach the organization. Now, one of the first things I just want to really kind of highlight here as we go through this is just remember this isn't something that's going to replace all of the capabilities of an advanced Excel user. I'm just saying it because I think that is really kind of obvious to some, but not obvious to others. When we talk about AI enablement, one of the things to note is that we're talking about accelerating the capabilities of an individual that is on the lower end typically of interacting with a particular application. It's not about replacing the power super user. It's about making the entry level to mid-tier type level of employee that interacts with an application to be able to do more and faster. And just as an example with that, we've had lots of conversations with people that are more in that tier of they use Excel every now and then, but they're not using it all the time, but they don't understand what a pivot table is. They don't understand how the sum if formula works and all the different types of requirements that are there to be able to get that to work accurately. They don't know about duplicate detection and how to remove that, or data cleansing tactics, or even more analysis, data analysis, right? So remember, these capabilities are not about typically making the more advanced user faster. Now, I would argue, though, that if you use kind of that 80-20 rule, like we do in life in general, you will see advantages that you'll be able to take into account, obviously, even with Excel as an advanced user. I personally use it to basically go through and, for example, address RFP requirements in my daily job as a pre-sales type architect, right? So just note that you've got to make sure that you align the tool to the right level inside of your organization. So start obviously more towards trying to automate more at a general level of entry level user, as opposed to saying you're going to replace all these people, because that's really not where we are inside of AI enablement. Now, with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my presentation just really quickly here, if it'll actually respond to my end, and let's go ahead and open up Excel. So first thing we're going to see here, obviously, is going to be Excel, and I'm going to create a blank workbook to kind of go through and start this. Now, I'm going to tell you this, which is really kind of fun and interesting to see as we've kind of progressed here. Um, we are seeing so many new features and capabilities added into these products that weren't here even 6 months ago. And I'm also going to say that we've got what's called a two-wave release that typically occurs on the Dynamics and Microsoft platform, where a lot of these features are really being incorporated in the spring and fall releases, whether they're in Excel or even inside of Dynamics 365. Now, Office on the same point has had a different type of release cadence, and the thing to know with it is that what I'm showing here now may be superseded in 6 months, right? So just note that the tactics that I'm sharing with you here today are really going to be critical in how you then interact with Excel. And we'll really cover some of the basics that are here as well. Now, I'm not going to cover licensing, but I will tell you that I have a M365 Copilot license. I think it's like 25, 35, or $30 or something of that nature that's been added then to my license. So that then allows me to use Copilot in Excel, Copilot in Word, and even the Microsoft 365 Copilot chat experience. Now, you're going to start seeing in the future here, because remember, Microsoft has had this huge reorg that they've tackled, that we're going to start seeing then some more of these base Copilot features that are available at the free tier. An example of that is like Copilot Chat is now exposed inside of Teams, and that's been being rolled out so that you can use some of the basic Copilot experiences inside of an application. So note that you're going to want to make sure that you got the right license level. And more typically, you're going to be getting that Microsoft 365 Copilot license to be able to go through and drive that. And Tracy put it in there, which is awesome in chat, $30 per user per month. And there's a discount for 10 users. And once again, it's a really great capability. Now, with that, because we're not going to go into a ton of detail with it, let's start now, obviously, with Copilot. And the one thing that you notice as soon as I opened up Excel is now we have this start with Copilot, where I can describe basically the tasks that I want to have tackled really as part of the process here. And so what's interesting about this is that this start with Copilot has a bunch of different types of basic opportunities that I can use to really get started to go faster, to build a table, for example, that may track something. And once again, we look at this as end users that are more advanced, like this is piddly. Well, quite candidly, once again, we're not trying to solve for that, right? We're trying to solve more for an end user that's never used Excel as an example, or someone that knows very basic capabilities inside of Excel. And remember, you can do training classes with it, but if you can have a machine take care of it for you to build it out, typically it's a lot easier than to interact with it as opposed to sending a resource to go to training for 2 weeks to do similar concepts. Now, it might be in conjunction that you do this, but remember, we're trying to up level people as we go through this process. Now, one of them I want to do just really quickly here is I want to create a table that tracks our sales leads in progress, right, as we go through this. And once again, I could have done something different. I could have done budget, I could have done inventory, and what it's going to do is it's going to know kind of those common fields that we would typically track then if we don't have a full-fledged CRM system as an example, that would then be incorporated into this Excel spreadsheet. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK to do that. We're going to see that it's going to, in the background, go through and then generate basically that table inside of here, where now I even have some interesting lead opportunities that are populated, where I've got about 12 different lead opportunities that are inside of here, along with some color coding that's inside of here as well. Now, what it could also do is I could add additional capabilities right to this by describing, I'd like to have additional fields as an example inside of here, but I'm going to leave it as is because I want to use some of those other features then inside of Copilot as we go through this. So once again, this is a brand new capability that was added where basically you can start then with a template that will apply then what those fields typically are. And if you think about it for opportunities here, your lead number, your name, the company you're interacting with, the contact that's related to it, the phone number, lead source, the status of the lead. These are pretty common fields that I see on leads inside of Dynamics 365 sales, right? So it absolutely makes sense. And we're going to show you how we can even go further with this as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click on keep that. And basically what we're going to have is the autosave feature that needs to be enabled. Now this is really interesting. So first and foremost, when it comes to Copilot, in order for Copilot to interact obviously with your data, to be able to have the Copilot chat experience, it needs to be saved on the actual tenant where the Copilot policies are enabled. We're not going to talk a lot about security obviously in this session because we're talking about capabilities. But the thing to note is that with IT, they can restrict security and access and all those different types of rules because what happens is we're actually saving the data, for example, in this example, on the Stone Ridge tenant, right? And that's what we talk about the grounding and the security where your data isn't being sent out then to an external source that is then used for training models. That type of stuff just doesn't happen on the Microsoft platform, not even anonymized. And this is a really important concept because when it comes to data, remember, your data is not used for any type of advanced research or model and capability inclusion, or even for web searches that are occurring as well with it. That data is very, very much yours, and it's centered and grounded inside of your tenant. Now, I'm going to call this just an example, my sales leads we'll do Copilot Flight Lab, right? So click on OK to that. Have it generate that workbook. Cool thing about this is, once again, sensitivity labels. We're going to set this as unrestricted as well. This is a new concept if you haven't heard about it, where basically we can have different types of confidentiality that we can put against data to make sure that we're compliant with many of those data and regulatory rules that you may have, such as GDPR or even internal policy rules. So it's natively integrated now into the Microsoft application. And wham, bam, there we have it. We've got our Excel spreadsheet that's been generated with those particular field names. Now, let's start going through some of the things that we can do with this, right? And one of those things is going to be, for example, maybe I want to create a field that would be a cost field that would be 20% of the deal value is what we want to allocate cost towards as we go through this. So this is an example basically of some of the capabilities that we can have inside of here to basically then do actions inside of Excel that we would typically do manually. And once again, I get it. You can right click, insert. If you know the formula, you can do that. And that might be better for you to do that. But if you're an end user that hasn't known how to do some of these formulas, and I'll even argue some of the advanced formulas that I'm going to show, you probably are going to see an advantage then of that, right? So I'm going to click on my home would be one area. And on my Copilot on the top right here, I have the ability then to pop out the Copilot sidecar. Now I could also in this column, right, go to Copilot and then chat with Copilot as well. So there's multiple avenues basically to get to Copilot. And you'll even see it as you kind of hover over, right, that you can actually click on Copilot here to basically access that capability as well. So really kind of up to you on how you want to get to it. I want to open up the sidecar experience so we can see basically that Copilot chat experience that's inside of here. And what's really cool about this is that it gives me, for example, some of the different types of things that I can do then inside of here to really go through and then drive some of the formatting that I may want to do inside of this particular spreadsheet, right? So summing, creating tables, for my recent emails about particular targets, right? So there's some really cool things that you can do. And as you can see, we're starting to get as well a little bit more advanced where it's integrating then into other applications to be able to get that data for you to then complete and then generate, for example, maybe additional recent emails for sales targets that we have that are incorporated inside of here. So over time, Once again, expect this to have more and more advanced capabilities. Well, let's do this. What I want to do is I want to create a new column inside of here. And I want to create a column that basically takes my deal value and assigns a cost that's related to a deal, because nothing in this world is free, right? So maybe your sales team, you can say as a general rule that 20% of the value typically is also a cost that you kind of budget as you go through this. So what can I do is I can message Copilot and ask Copilot, can we do that? So can you create a new field called deal cost USD that takes the deal value USD and apportions, or whatever you want to do, 20% of that value as a cost in a new number field that has two decimals, right? So something like that. Now, once again, you're going to say, Scott, wait a second. What are you doing here? You're did way more clicks than I expected. Well, one thing I could have done as well, microphone. Now we're on stream, right? So I don't want to do that to intercept the microphone, but you could have actually talked to the machine to have it do the same thing, right? Once again, if you don't know how to do these formulas, this is going to make it easier then for you to basically interact and create some of these. And let's go through a couple of examples with this. So I'm going to go ahead and say, ask it to create that. It's going to take a look at the data that's inside of this Excel spreadsheet. It's basically going to analyze that range for it, and it's going to generate basically that formula suggestion based upon that detail. And what we're going to see here is that it's going to round that as well based upon the deal value times 20 divided by 100, which is 20%, right? And then get us basically that deal cost inside of here. And then what I can do is I can click on the insert column, and boom, I've got that deal cost basically incorporated into here. Now, this is once again a really cool feature, right? So it's different to use the machine to basically create that. But the cool thing about it is that you can see as well the formula that was generated inside of here. And what's really interesting about these formulas is the fact that you can also then have Copilot explain the formula to you so you can understand more of how that formula is actually processing inside of Excel. And this is a nice capability, because if you think about some of the more advanced type formulas that you may have inside of a workbook, it can be confusing because you may have references, for example, inside of another sheet. It could actually have a much more complex formula that's inside of here. And as you can see, as I say, explain what this formula does here, what it's going to do is it's going to take that concept and those values and then generate a description that says basically what we talked about, 20% of the value in the deal value USD column for the current row, and then rounds the result to two decimal places. So just in case we actually had amounts in the deal value that were fractional, we're rounding it basically then to that particular value, right? And then it'll break out the column name, the 20 divided by 100 for 20% or 0.02. It even gives an explanation of that. And then the rounding that happens with the two decimal places that are here. So as an end user, if you're like, you know what, I want to go 3 decimal places, you could probably extrapolate that to say, I want that to be, for example, 3 inside of here instead of 2. Or if I want to increase it by 25% instead of 20, what would I change inside of here? Well, let's see if it kind of does that formula for us. And what we should see, hopefully, is that it actually does a 25, which would be the 0.75 with it, right? Which means then I could actually put this inside of here for that sales value as a part of it, right? So once again, kind of got to be smart here though too, because maybe the intent of the conversation was that it's 25% then of obviously the deal cost that you want to have, right? Instead of a 20%, you want a 25%. Well, once again, just know that you got to be smarter than the machine sometimes, and you have to interpret the results that are inside of here, right? And that's one key thing I just want to kind of reflect here on. Remember, this is about you still have to use your critical thinking when interacting with an application, even though it feels like Copilot is very authoritative. Large language models always tell you what they think is the absolute truth based on patterns that they're trained off of. But sometimes those patterns, they go the wrong direction based upon the scaffolding that you provide. So make sure you use that scaffolding really to drive that. Now let's go through a more complex example. I'd like to create another column called deal cost scaled, we'll say, or progressive. Let's do progressive. That sounds more progressive. In which all opportunities, all leads, excuse me, all leads that have a deal value from 0 to 5,000 have a cost of 30% of the deal value USD, where where they have a cost of 40% for all value that is between 5,000 to 12,000, and that have a cost of 50% where all deal value is over $12,000, right? Let's see how well this does. This is the fun thing about doing these live. If it breaks, it's not my fault, right? It's always a demo, right? So anyways, let's see what it does for the formulas as it kind of looks at this detail. So we obviously now have this detail inside of here. We've got a deal cost progressive with it. So look at this. Once again, this is the power of using large language models. And this is where large language models do a very good job. Large language models do not do a very good job of throwing data at it, just candidly. Once again, when you go above basically 64,000 characters of data, not 64,000 rows, 64,000 characters, it does not have very good accuracy. So remember, this is intrinsic on all large language models. Copilot is a large language model, but what they can do is they can take what you tell it to do to create a formula that's related to it. So an example would be like on the technical side of SQL Server, you would do something to say, create a SQL query in Copilot to gather the records. You wouldn't say, here are all the records, throw it to the Copilot, and then have it find the records. You use basically Copilot to generate the type of query that would be needed for this. So as you can see here, what we have are these deal values that are inside of here. And what we see is that if it's less than 5,000, it's 30%. If it's greater than or less than 12,000, it's X%, so on and so forth, right? That is scaled inside of here. So what I can do is I can go ahead and insert that column. And, well, what the heck? This looks interesting. All right, well, that's great that we inserted that column, but it looks like the formatting that they added to here as a custom format just really isn't working. So what I could do is I could say, please remove the custom formatting on the deal cost progressive so that it is in a general format, right? And once again, we'll see how this works. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But what's going to happen here is that it should see now that I have this column and that a formula was applied towards it. And on sheet 2, there's a change with it. Auto fit the column and then auto fit it. So remove a general format or apply a general format, and then auto filter it or auto column. Let's go ahead and apply that as a part of it. Let's see if it applies it. And then there we go. We've got now that deal cost that's actually reflected inside of here. What if I wanted to, I could also say, go ahead and add a number format to the deal cost progressive where we show 2 decimals, right? Something like that. So maybe you want to do something like that as a part of it, and then boom, you're going to have it then apply that custom format inside of here. So once again, these are really kind of basic, and you can see here that it looks like the ampersand that was there was not accurate before. If we apply that now the custom format that's applied looks to be more accurate, and then those values inside of here are obviously going to be a little bit better. So just note that it does allow us to basically go through and then align what those values are. Now let's go through this, and I want to add one more column because I'd like to just validate my work inside of here. So I want to create a margin field, right? And so go ahead and create a new field called deal margin USD and take the deal value minus the deal cost progressive to generate that value. Go ahead and do that. And here's the thing that's really fun about this. You don't know if it's going to break until it breaks, so we'll wait for it to go through and do its calculation. And, I keep on saying it because once again, with Copilot and any large language model, once again, you need to be smarter about what you're doing to be able to drive that. So here we have basically that deal margin is number, looks a little bit too complex, right? So let's try it and see what happens here because I'd love to see that. And then I'm going to take the formats and say, remove the custom format from the deal margin and apply a general format to it, right? We'll do that. Now, one thing I could do, right click, go to format cells, go to the formatting, set it to general, but really I want to stay in Copilot as I do this as much as possible. We're going to see it did identify the right column as a part of it. Let's go ahead and apply that. All right, so let's see here. That looks to be accurate. That looks to be accurate as well, right? So, and in fact, what we can do is we can do an insert here and we can do deal margin, right? Test, and we could actually then take this, minus this, right? And so we could see those values and we can see, once again, we did get the right results, right? So I just want to verify my work as I go through this, right? But what the heck? Talk about the formula and what it did here, which is interesting, right? So it looks like it even identified, for example, numbers or some inconsistency because remember, the deal value field might be a general field, right? It may not be formatted as a number field. And so that means then if it is a number that's inside of there and there isn't a number inside of it, it's respecting those values. And that's an interesting concept because as an end user, you're going to look at this and be like, this is way more complex than what Scott just created right here. But this is actually a better formula technically, because if there was a general value inside of that field, I would get a division by zero error, right? Whereas in this example, if it is a number, it gives it. Otherwise, it sets it as an A. And we can once again explain this formula in more detail by going ahead and putting it in here and then having Excel then break it out in more detail for you. So once again, not always perfect, as you would say, or doesn't make as much sense, I think, in some ways to an end user. But technically, like me as an Excel user, I can tell you that this is a better formula than the formula I just used when it comes then to errors as part of that. So it would make this much more resilient in the spreadsheet compared to my more basic formula that I used for my deal margin test. Kind of didn't expect that, to be honest, while on stream. It's actually kind of cool, to be honest. All right, so with that, see, it's not a number. It returns NA, which it displays as NA to indicate missing or invalid data. So once again, this is a better formula that Copilot came up with compared to my test formula that I put inside of here, and it is accurate. So pretty cool in that regard. All right, let's go through a couple more features. So we've gone through obviously creating columns, formatting columns. You're seeing how I'm interacting with Copilot. You see where I've got some other areas that were good and bad. Let's go ahead and do some highlighting inside of here. So basically, let's go ahead and highlight any of the deal costs that exceed, we'll say, $3,000 deal cost, and I'm going to say deal cost progressive, right? Progressive that exceed $3,000. So basic formatting, right, type things that we can apply towards this, where maybe I want to have some of these specific ones highlighted inside of here that are greater than $3,000 and apply then this particular formatting for it. And if I click on apply to that, we can see, yep, looks like these ones are all the ones that have a much higher cost that's related to them, right? So if you want to do some type of the formatting type options that are inside of here, you can use that in Excel really quickly to generate that formula. And then from there, it's going to apply those. Now, you could change the fill color, right? So, I could say, do a fill color of whatever the value is. And then from there, you could use like pink, purple, or whatever you want to do as the visual indicator that's related to it. So pretty cool capability in that regard as well. Now, some of the other things that we can do, let's keep going because I want to show like other scenarios, right? And one might be, for example, I want to create a chart, right? So using, for example, summarize using the pivot table or chart-based capability. Let's generate a chart off of this. So I'd like to create a bar chart that shows the total deal value by lead source in this spreadsheet, right? So I'm basically saying pretty honestly, right? So I've got obviously our lead sources that are inside of here and even statuses maybe that I want to use as well. But let's start with something more basic to basically then create a pivot chart inside of here, right? So what I could do is I could click on this and let's see what it does to generate basically that capability. So let's go through this and see what it does. And it's almost there as it goes through the processing. There we have an analysis that's coming up on the sheet here. And what I should be able to see here in just a second is an example then of the value of what those are for the sum of detail for this. And so we can see that it is also in thousands. And if I add it then to a new sheet that's inside of here, I have basically these particular values that are inside of here. And once again, what you could do to go a little bit farther is you could actually come in here and change the chart type, right? Where maybe I want it to look a little bit prettier because I want to add some 3D effects. Like look at that. Look at that acceleration inside of Excel for 3D capabilities. But we can see that the total value here of $124,000 once again should match this. And what I could do is I could say sum up the deal value USD in this table, right? So we'll see if that works too and have this go through the chart capability and do the sum field hopefully for it. We'll wait for it because maybe you didn't know how to do the sum with it. So we can see what that sum value is. And if I wanted to, I could add it to a new sheet inside of here, right? And then from there, I could have that total deal value. So I'm even asking questions of the data, which is pretty cool where I could add it to a new sheet if I wanted to. And then I've got a whole new sheet that just has the value that uses a pivot table to drive that. That's kind of cool. Or once again, if I want to, because now I know how to do the sum, I could say sum that up for that column and then boom, have that inside of here. If I could actually sum properly, excuse me, boom. And then 124,000 is inside of here as well. So lots of interesting capabilities here so far, right? In terms of being able to generate those charts really quickly and easily by doing pivot tables. And maybe you've never seen a pivot table before. Another example might be, can you create a pivot table that sums the deal value USD and the deal cost USD by lead source and also by status? Let's see if this works. Like I've never done a compound one where it's multiples, and I even had a typo that was inside of here that ums the deal value. It's a new way of summing, just so everyone knows. And let's see here what it creates. Oh my gosh, look at that. Sum of deal value, sum of deal cost. All right, let's go ahead and add that to a new sheet. Click on the action in progress by lead source, sum of the deal value, sum of the deal cost. Okay, great. Like, that's pretty cool. Like if you had a big spreadsheet that had more rows inside of it, this is typically what you would use it to do, right? And as you can see, as long as my design pattern keeps that field very specific as we go through it, we're getting some really good results and very consistent results then for our output inside of here. So as you can see, I've got these values inside of here, and if I wanted to go further, I could add, for example, additional details such as maybe the expected close date becomes a column that's inside of here, right? Where I can see when that cost and when that revenue is going to hit as well so that I can create some more complex scenarios as well with it. So just note that that is something that is totally capable here, right, to be able to do. Tracy, you nailed it when it comes to the spreadsheet. Remember, a lot of these types of calculations that I'm interacting with require that tables are actually set up and used inside of really Excel. Now, I will say that they've been adding some really cool features recently that makes it so that you don't always need to use tables. But more commonly, best practice, make sure that you have your table set up as you're interacting with it to be able to get to that detail. All right, so we've gone through a couple. Hopefully, this kind of opens your mind in terms of what we can do. Let's go further. Let's go through some of the more advanced capabilities. Now, data analysis, like I said, is not a really good thing to use Copilot for. Um, and it's what everyone wants, though, right? So how do we get to what everyone wants to use Copilot to get beyond the formatting as an example to be able to drive this? And that is where we can use the new Python capability to analyze our data using Python. What do I mean by that? So in the Copilot experience here, I can click on the Get Deeper Analysis results by using Python. And what's really interesting about this is that it takes the table that you have and it uses concepts called clustering to basically identify where value or where there's going to be a lot of similarities basically inside of the data so that you can create narratives then off of that data that you're analyzing. There are more advanced capabilities when you look at Azure and start using machine learning, for example, to be able to do these calculations. But what's really cool about this is that this get deeper analysis results using Python uses a lot of those Python-based capabilities to be able to drive that. And this is once again, we're getting really advanced here when we start talking about a programming language that Copilot writes to then analyze the data inside of Excel. Once again, this is where Copilot and large language models shine, where they direct and orchestrate the queries and the responses that need to occur, but they're not doing the data analysis. Other tools do the data analysis, and they then use those tools like a person would to do that analysis as well. Because I'd argue it's really hard for a human being to memorize a million rows and then give an analysis with it. You memorize, how do I do the pivot table? What action do I do inside of the pivot table? How do I do the sum? How do I do the grouping? How do I identify the clusters, right? You do this naturally, and that's the way we use these systems then to drive it. And once you understand that concept, Copilot just becomes so much easier to use compared to where you were in the past. So let's go ahead and get the deeper analysis using Python. And let's see what it breaks and what it does. So what we're doing is we're saying, up, and told you it was something's going to happen here. Looks like we crashed. Let's go ahead and boot up Excel again. Let's regenerate really those quick those leads that are inside of here. And let's try it one more time because quite honestly, I'm not sure if maybe I've done something now where Copilot doesn't like my analysis. So pitter patter. Let's see what happens. Create a table. Let's get started. Let's go ahead and do this. Okay, good. We got an analysis sheet. We have a data frame that's being generated off of it, off of the deal cost margin, dollars, finding clusters around it. We've got our lead details that are inside of here. It's looking at Python now to use the formulas to be able to do this. Aren't you glad we had autosave? Like, how cool is that as well, right? That the system, well, I had an application crash, it still recovered it and was right where we left it by using that autosave feature. Great thing, Microsoft. Great job. All right, let's go ahead and expand this out. So we've got some deeper analysis. And basically what happened is we created some detail around this. So let's take a look at the visualizations that were created and really kind of talk about this, right? So distribution of deal value by the number of deals. So where we have more of our deals like a pipeline, almost in some ways. The win and loss count by lead source. So it looks like we lose a loss when we do emails, but we win a lot when we have events or referrals, which makes sense. We've got a status of the average deal size. So the ones that we win lately, average size, seem to be quite a bit bigger in terms of margin that we have versus the lost ones were low margin, which is probably a good thing. And then our progress by status right now on new and in progress, we don't have any that are, or one are up here, kind of shows where they are in the progress percentage, kind of where they are in progress, right? And where that average is basically as we navigate that. So this is kind of interesting how we use basically that detail as part of it. And so let's do something else. Like let's go through and show the summary statistics for the deal value, margin, and progress that are incorporated inside of here and see kind of what it generates as part of this. So now we're starting to get more and more into these details to see the mean, the standard deviation, the mins, our brackets that we have that we incorporate with it, and then a summary revolving around it. So the average deal value is about 10.33, which most deals running from 4 to 20%. The average deal margin then is around 5,838, and progress on deals typically falls between 0.5 and 1. It's pretty large discrepancy there, right, that we could do with it. And then what I could do is I could visualize maybe the relationship between deal value and progress, and maybe you want to visualize the relationship between deal value and additional progress, right? So we can have a scatter plot that was generated, and based upon the value, typically once we get over here, we've got some more value, it looks like, that is in the 20,000 range, that is for a 1, right, for 100% in progress. So once again, I can use different fields to be able to drive that. But what's really cool about this is that I'm just using core capabilities inside of Copilot to generate some of these additional charts and graphs and analysis that I could use then to kind of explain what's going on here. So once again, a pretty cool feature in that regard. And let's go through one of the final features I wanted to show. So great, we've got this advanced Python-based capability. We got autosave that's updating in the background here. Let's go through a really common one that I've heard in the past. I want to create a macro that capitalizes all contact emails, right? Like this is interesting because I know some people still do it, to each their own. Let's go ahead and have it create a macro for this, right? So as an example, what I could do, I could say I'd create a macro that capitalizes the contact email so that all characters are in uppercase, right? So what are we using Copilot to do? We're using it to create basically macros inside of here, right? And so, oh, absolutely. Let me stop the advanced analytics first. Let's go ahead and recopy paste that because I was still in the advanced capability. And let's go ahead now and create that macro inside of here. So once again, some of you don't know what a macro is. Macro is basically an automated bunch of code that can be run inside of a spreadsheet that basically does an action then inside of Excel to do something, making something uppercase, copying field values from one column to another column, right? And so what I can do here is I've got this value here. So here is my subroutine that I can draw, and I can copy that as an example. And what I can do then is I can go into my developer tools, go into my macros, create a new macro, and we'll call this uppercase contact email, right? Go ahead and click on the create action for it. If I was smart enough and made sure that macros need to have this inside of it. So we'll go ahead and recreate that. So we'll do a macro again. We'll do uppercase email. We'll do as an example, create it inside of here. And of course, it pops up on the wrong screen. Copy paste, save it away. Go ahead and save this. And then we'll go ahead and click on run because maybe you've got a bunch of macros that you create for it. And we'll go into the spreadsheet and we can see that it did in uppercase for all of those emails. So you just wrote code. Can you imagine that? Like how many of you thought you would be able to do that where you can tell Copilot, create a macro, it creates the macro for you. You don't have to know any of this stuff in terms of what that formula does, but it identified the table, it identified the contact email, and then from there, it did the uppercase with it as part of it. Now you would save this then as an Excel macro, obviously, as we went through this, but the net result is that you can use this capability then, as you can imagine, to go even faster when it comes to maybe some of the automated macro type features that you want to add to a workbook. So a pretty cool capability then as well, where you're using Copilot here to basically generate code for you to get work done faster as you go through this. All right, let's go through one final example that I want to share. So very commonly, a lot of people, what they want to do is they want to interact possibly with something like an RFP, right? And one of the things that's really kind of interesting here is the fact that RFPs, as an example, have a lot of requirements and capabilities and response details that are typically needed. Now, remember, Copilot in Excel is all about automating capabilities and features inside of Excel. When we're trying to get information, for example, about these capabilities, we may want to use a different application to drive that, because with your Copilot license, you don't only just have it inside of Excel, you have M365 Copilot Chat as well to be able to help you generate this content. So an example would be, what you can do is, let's go ahead and copy these as an example. Now let's go to my Copilot Chat experience inside of here. And what I could do is I could say, can you create a response column for each of these requirements that I paste inside of in this chat, that then tells, or that then gives a brief description on how Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central addresses that requirement, right? So we'll do that. We'll paste it in here. So we've got that content, and we'll click on OK to it to generate it. And so we can see then that we've got a bunch of content that was inside of here. And look at this. There it provides me with all these capabilities that show all of the details then for forecasting, for Business Central, what it supports, for reorder points when they hit a minimum inventory. We should have 9, right, that are inside of here. And what I could do is I could say, please format this into an Excel table, right? Bam. Then I got an Excel file that gets generated off of it. Then what I can do is I can take that Excel file and then copy and paste those values inside of Excel to get a starting point on those responses, right? And you can see then as it generates this, what we should then see for that Excel table, if I click on it and then look at those responses inside of here, is that I should now have those responses, right? And these 9 responses, because I did it as a table, should be the 9 values that are inside of here, right? So this is an example, once again, of going faster, still using Excel to do the work and to get all that detail inside of here, but then basically to allow it to go through and then generate the content that I'll then review. And so maybe what I'll do here is format these cells even further to do, for example, wrapping of text as part of it. Yep, and of course, I should have done it the right way, right? So that way, all the text is wrapped inside of here, but then I'm able to go through very quickly and then do those responses as a part of it. So this is another example then of using the other tools to basically then continue moving forward and really adding more value inside of Excel as you go through this. One final note, you could, inside of even your Microsoft 365 experience, upload that Excel file and then generate a new Excel file that then has those descriptions. But once again, just be very cautious on how large of a file you're interacting with, because you might get inconsistent results with that, which means you may need to chunk it out to basically copy paste, or even just do smaller sets of data that you want to have summarized. So that way you keep that accuracy level very high as you go through that process. So once again, it's all about learning. And I'll tell you, for filling out an RFP as an example, like I've described to other team members, I have been absolutely able to go faster as I've gone through this process in the past as well. So let's go ahead and wrap up here. I'm going to go ahead and swap my view just really quickly here. Hopefully these demonstration topics made a lot of sense to you. As you can tell, there's a lot you can do inside of here. Let's kind of go through just the conclusion here. So first and foremost, Copilot. Yep.
So sorry to interrupt you. We are quite a bit over. We did have this ending at 12:45, and I actually need to jump to another webinar. So I am so sorry. If we could just do this wrap really quickly. I didn't want to interrupt you because you're going through so much good stuff, and I know we got a lot of people engaged on here. But I think we're going to have to wrap it really quickly. So
No worries. That's called the hook, everyone in the audience that wants to know about my vamping here. So just really quickly, yep, Copilot in Excel, obviously, a lot of great capabilities using natural language to tackle it. There's some advanced topics, obviously, that are still tackled, especially like, for example, with that Python. And the key thing just to note is that just remember there's going to be new features that are continually added. And then also using Copilot then to be able to do other actions that can happen inside of Excel, but still generating those Excel workbooks will make it very easy for you as well. So with that, Bree, I got the hook. Appreciate you chiming in. Everyone have a
loved
great
it.
rest of their week. And yeah, I'll see you next time on Flight Lab.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks everybody for joining us. See you next time.